1629. Let the record reflect that Mr. Kirkland is present in court and the jury is not here at this point. Mr. Wendell, do you want to put something on the record?
Your Honor, thank you. You will be presenting what we'll call Part 2 of Dr. Drew's videotape deposition, the one from April 19, 2018. Judge, we have prepared transcripts for each jury member to have through the course of the proceedings. We've talked with counsel. Pages 5, 6, and 7 have been omitted from the transcripts that the jury members will have because that was a colloquy with counsel only. It was not on video. That was relative to some proprietary information of the doctor and discussion among counsel for that. So that, by agreement, has been omitted from the transcript that we provided. Judge, we would also suggest that it would be appropriate that the jury be told that they will be hearing objections during the course of the playing of the videotape from both the state and the defense. But we both feel, and I believe that the state agrees, that they should be advised that either the objections have been withdrawn by the respective parties or overruled by the court, and therefore they can disregard the objections.
Okay. I appreciate it. Anything from the state on that?
Just that I agree with that, and it also applies to our next two depositions that will be played in the rebuttal of Dr. Holzer and Dr. Wright.
Okay.
The one final note that I just wanted to make, just so that the record is clear, the transcript that was provided to the jury yesterday was redacted pursuant to the stipulation regarding Dr. Wu's deposition, which was filed with the court on January 31st of this year. So that transcript was accordingly redacted. Just so the record is clear, I just wanted to note that. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anything else before we bring the jury in? Okay. All right, thank you all very much for bringing the jury in. Thank you for your cooperation. Ms. Christopher? Yes. Please be seated, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning again to all of you. You look good today. You look like you're ready to roll today, so I appreciate that. Actually, we may have to be a little shorter today, so it may work out a little bit better for you today, so appreciate your attention. We're going to proceed then with the next witness. The next witness is indicated by counsel, I believe, earlier, Dr. Wu, Part 2. If you will. Again, you're going to hear that by way of video deposition. By agreement of the parties, each of you will be provided with a written transcript of the testimony to assist you. Should you find any discrepancy between what you thought you heard versus what you see in writing, the audio controls, you will decide based on the audio. Also, ladies and gentlemen, in this particular one, you make your objections. Okay? All of the objections have either been withdrawn by counsel or overruled or taken care of legally by myself. So during the course of the objections, just listen to them. Well, I'm not going to really listen to them, but just kind of disregard them as best you can.
Good afternoon. This is the videotape deposition of Dr. Joseph Wu, taken at 1200 Wales Street, Suite 140, Newport Beach, California, 92660, on April 19, 2018, in the matter of the State of Ohio versus Anthony Kirkland. Case number is B0901629. This case is being heard in the Common Pleas Court of the State of Ohio and for the County of Carrollton. This deposition is on behalf of the plaintiff. My name is Renee Mayfield with Dean Jones Legal Videos, Inc. of Los Angeles and Santa Ana, California. This deposition is commencing at 1:12 p.m. Would all present please identify themselves, beginning with the deponent.
My name is Dr. Joseph Wu.
Richard G. Gibson, Assistant Hamilton County Prosecutor.
Timothy R. Kutcher, Attorney for Defendant Anthony Kirkland.
Richard G. Wendell, the second attorney as well for Mr. Kirkland.
Would the court reporter please administer the oath?
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in the false nominee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Good afternoon, Dr. Wendell.
Good afternoon, Mr. Gibson.
We had a little break in this case from when you gave your direct examination, so let me kind of recap that, how we got it off. You gave your direct testimony in this case back on November 6, 2017, is that correct?
Yes.
And you gave that by televideo conference hookup?
Yes.
We were in Cincinnati. I knew representatives of the prosecutor's office and the attorneys for Anthony Kirkland who were at that day in an office in Cincinnati. You were somewhere out here in California?
Yes.
Where were you specifically?
I don't recall. There are several different video conferencing sites that I utilized, and so I don't recall which of the several it was.
But you were out in the California area, in the area near where we are right now?
Yes.
In and around Irvine?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in that testimony that you gave back on November the 6th of 2017, you testified that you had been a witness in 200 to 300 cases, is that correct?
Yes.
Cases where you had analyzed brain scans, and most of those done in criminal cases, is that correct?
I would say actually probably mostly done in civil cases.
Okay.
I would say it's about 60-40.
Okay. But you had done many criminal cases where you analyzed brain scans of criminal defendants?
Yes.
And I believe you said you did about 50 Florida cases involving capital defendants that were either going to trial on death penalty cases or in post-conviction hearings on death penalty cases. Is that correct?
Yes, or resentencing hearings.
All right. How many cases do you think? Is 50? That's the number you gave in your direct. Does that sound about right?
That sounds like a approximate ballpark. That sounds about right.
That's not all the criminal cases that you've done. That's what you did out of Florida, correct?
That's correct.
All right. In the criminal cases that you've done, you've always testified for the defense. Is that fair?
Yes.
Never once, not once testified as a state's witness. Is that correct?
That's correct. I've never been asked by a state's attorney to testify about a scam.
Well, the reason you've probably not been asked and the reason you haven't testified is, isn't it true that you've always found, when hired by the defense in a case, that your examination of the brain scans revealed traumatic brain injury?
Well, I would say not always true, but I would say that it's true in the vast majority of cases because of the nature of the population that is being referred to me.
So your testimony, is it different now? Because in your direct exam, you said you always had found traumatic brain injuries. Is that not true?
Well, in the case where I have testified, it's typically been brain injury or some psychiatric disease, like bipolar, schizophrenia, or some type of combination.
All right. So let me ask this. How many cases were you called in to review traumatic brain scans did you find no evidence of traumatic brain injury? How many?
I would say maybe, I'm thinking a couple. They're fairly rare.
Out of 100?
That sounds about right, yes.
Can you name those cases for me?
No, I'd have to look through my files.
So only on 2 occasions did you not find traumatic brain injury, and yet you don't even recall the cases?
I don't remember. The specific cases, no.
What are the criteria for you when you examine these brain scans for making a finding of traumatic brain injury? What are you looking for, and what do you need before you can say this is evidence of traumatic brain injury?
Well, there are 2 levels of assessment that I utilize currently. The first level is what I call a visual analysis, where I eyeball a scan, and then based on my clinical experience with looking at hundreds of scans, I determine if the scan appears to differ significantly from that of a normal pattern, But then I would say more recently, in the last few years, I've also added what we call a quantitative analysis, so-called observer-independent Z-maps, where a statistical parametric map,
I'm sorry, repeat that?
a statistical parametric map is generated comparing a patient with that of a normal population, and one can then determine if there are significant abnormalities on the Z-map. So this provides kind of a objective, secondary, additional level of analysis.
And you mentioned the normal brain scans, that you have a database that you use to compare to the scans of the person who you've been retained to examine?
Yes.
All right. Where do those norms come from?
They come from UC Irvine.
Okay. And who did those scans?
I did those scans.
And they're scans of whom?
Normal controls?
Who? Students?
I would say it's a mix. There were some students, but there were non-students as well.
Okay. And what's the criteria? You said, are you looking for asymmetry?
I was looking for individuals who initially we screened to see if they had any significant neurological psychiatric history, and then if they had no significant history, then we scanned them.
All right. Now, when you look at a scan and it appears to you to be asymmetrical, is that one of the things that will cause you to call that an abnormal brain scan?
It depends on the degree of asymmetry. There is a certain normal level of asymmetry that occurs in the population. And so the question is the asymmetry to such an extent that it is an aberrant degree of asymmetry? So it's not simply the presence of asymmetry, it's whether the asymmetry is to such a great extent that it is aberrant.
So you agree that even normal brain scans can be asymmetrical?
Oh, certainly. There's no question about that.
When you talk about do you use a deviation from the norm as a certain factor in determining when that goes from normal to the area of abnormal?
Well, I would say that with this Z-map analysis, I'm using a p-value of 0.01 and what we call an extent threshold of 30 contiguous voxels, which means that you have to have not just a few voxels that are 0.1 or greater. There has to be 30 of them all connected for this to be considered significant enough and large enough clump of abnormal voxels to be thresholded out.
All right. And when you say 2 deviations from the norm, what does that mean?
Well, 2 deviations from the norm, that is referring to a normal bell curve. And so with a normal bell curve, like with height or, for example, like if you were to look at height for the average 30-year-old male, the average 30-year-old male is about 5 feet 10 inches with a standard deviation of about 3 inches. And so 2 standard deviation would mean that you would take 5 feet 10 inches and you subtract 2 times 3. I mean, that would be 2 standard deviations, since standard deviation. 2 times this standard deviation of 3 inches. So 5 feet 10 inches minus 2 times the standard deviation of 3 inches would be 6 inches. So that would be 5'4", and then you would add 2 times the standard deviation of 3 inches to the average to get 6 inches above 5 feet 10, which would be 6 feet 4. So that would mean that 95% of the population would fall between 5 feet 4 inches and 6 feet 10 and 6 feet 4 inches, I believe. And so when we're looking at the p-values, the 01 is actually greater than 2 standard deviation. It's about approximately 2.5 standard deviation. So,
What kind of deviation do you need before you call something abnormal?
well, it would have to be approximately equal to a p-value of 0.01, which is approximately 2.5 standard deviations, and it would have to have 30 of these voxels stuck together in order for the SPM Z-map to read the area as abnormal.
All right. Now, Dr. Wu, you were contacted at some point in 2009 by the Ohio Public Defender's Office and
Yes.
asked about becoming involved in the case of Anthony Kirkland. Is that correct?
Yes, it was a number of years ago.
Okay. And they had done some interviews. The attorneys or one of their investigators had done some interviews of family members of Kirkland. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And one of the things that caused you to believe that you might be able to assist them was some things they indicated in their interviews that Anthony Kirkland may have had some head injury during his life. Is that correct?
Yes.
Because if you're going to talk about traumatic brain injury, there has to be some kind of a trauma. There has to be some kind of an injury, correct?
Yes.
All right. And based upon the interviews they did, you thought you might be able to help.
Yes.
All right. And I think they talked to you about interviews of Kirkland. And there was, for example, and I just for the record, I did not have this at your deposition on November 6th. I appreciate Mr. Wendell being kind enough to make sure I got copies of these. There were a couple of interviews in October and July of 2009 by a John Lee, who I believe is an investigator with the Ohio Public Defender.
Yes.
And the first one being an interview on June 23rd of 2009 at the Justice Center. I guess the sum total of what he noted in this page-and-a-half interview as far as injuries to Mr. Kirkland is him saying he had gone to the hospital on several occasions, that he had been involved in fights resulting in some broken bones, that he dislocated his shoulder in a bike accident. You mentioned the bike accident in your direct, did you not?
Yes, I think that was a 2004 bike accident.
Yeah, but Anthony Kirkland didn't say he injured his head in this interview, according to what I'm reading. Is this what you read?
I read many documents, and that
Okay.
was one of many documents I read, yes.
So he never mentioned anything about a head injury. He said he dislocated his shoulder, said he was in a car accident, but didn't specify what kind of an injury he had. Is that one of the things you would have read or been made aware of?
I mean, I know that, let's see here, I look at my notes about that. I know that he had some type of accident in 2004. Let's see. I think October 11th, 2004, when he was 36, and he had a right-sided facial fracture. And certainly, if you have a fracture of the face is part of the head, and the brain is inside the head, a force that's sufficient to cause a facial fracture is certainly sufficient to cause a traumatic brain injury.
That information is from where, Dr. Wu?
Let's see. I don't recall specifically which report I saw this in. I summarized information about his history, but I didn't note all the sources in the summary, and so it would take me some time there were hundreds of pages, and I think in retrospect, I probably should have documented each statement and the source. I just documented salient statements I thought would be relevant to the case, but when I was doing the record review, I didn't record the source, and I could go back and do that. It's just that,
Well, the source is what gets this whole thing started, right?
Well,
the source reporting an injury to Anthony Kirkland.
It was in a set of CDs that were provided to me by Mr. Ancona. He had hundreds of pages in there, and so I knew it was on those 4 CDs that he sent to me.
Right.
But and I assumed that everyone had those 4 CDs with those documents, and so I didn't think it was critical to document that kind of people would know the documents on there, but I guess, that was, I think in retrospect, I probably would have documented the exact page and et cetera, from each CD that this information came from. So,
All right. Then in July of 2009, July 16th, there was another interview by the defendant with a John Lee, that same investigator. Mm-hmm. And the only mention he made of being injured was when he reported that his father would sometimes hit him with his hand or his fist. But he reported he would beat him whenever he did anything bad, but it never led to a necessity to seek medical treatment from the beatings. Is that right?
Well,
the beating stopped when he was age 14?
Yes, that he was physically abused by his alcoholic, sounds like bipolar father from the ages of 6 till 14, and that he was oldest of 4, and that he took the brunt of the anger that the father had when the father was temperamental, and that he had contusions to his head, according to some of the documents I read, which would certainly be consistent with significant force being applied to the head. And kids' heads are very delicate, especially before the age of 12. We know from studies done that, for example, if you look at professional football players who started playing football before age 12 and who started playing football after age 12, those who started playing football before age 12 have a higher rate of chronic traumatic encephalopathy than those who start playing after the age of 12. So we know that the brain before age 12 is especially sensitive to multiple concussions, and so judging from the history that I obtained through the records I reviewed, it seemed quite clear that he was struck on the head multiple times between the ages of 6 and 14.
Who said anything about the head? Anthony Kirkland said he was hit with a hand or fist. Who said anything about the head?
Well, there was one of the reports that stated that he had contusions to the head. A contusion to the head would have to come from some kind of head being struck.
And who said that again?
Again, I don't recall the source. I mean, I can go back and find the source, but I don't have it written down currently.
Do you recall the interview that Mr. Lee did with Carol Spencer, Kirkland's mother, and Daniel Palmer, his brother?
I read all those records, yes.
When she talked about injuries, she said he got a head injury while working at Queen City Barrel.
Right, in 1985.
Okay.
And he had memory loss from that, and he was treated at Mayfield Neurological.
She didn't say anything in this interview about memory loss.
Well, again, one of the other documents I read indicated that there was memory loss.
But you didn't cite that. You didn't.
I have it in my report, but I didn't cite the specific page and the source for that information. But everything in my report, I didn't make any of this stuff up. It was all in those 4 CDs.
And in the interview with them, the brother said, again, Anthony fell down a hill while riding a bike and dislocated his shoulder. No mention about a head injury.
Well,
right? So why did you bring the bicycle accident up in the...
Because there was a report that he had a right-sided facial fracture.
Not in the bike accident.
In the bicycle accident, October 11, 2004, okay. That was treated at Mercy Franciscan Hospital.
Okay, we'll look that up in just a second. Then there was the interview by Mr. Lee on October 10th of Angela Kirkland, his sister. She made no reference at all to Anthony Kirkland ever being injured, did she? All she talked about was how he abused her both sexually and physically, right?
That's correct. That's an accurate summary of her statement. That's correct. That's an accurate summary of her statement.
All right. Although you got this information from the state public defender, you weren't retained, you did not work or testify in that first trial. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. But you did get some other information from them later. Is that correct?
I got information on multiple occasions, and so...
All right, if I could, let me refer to State's Deposition Exhibit 1. You're aware that in 2009, he was in January of 2009, he was in the Hamilton County, or I think he was in the University Hospital on the psych ward, is that correct? And they had him taken to University Hospital
Yes.
to have some scans done, is that correct?
Right, an MRI.
They had an MRI brain scan done. Now, again, this was done January 13th, 2009, is that correct?
Yes.
And it was done at University Hospital. Are you
Yes.
familiar with that hospital?
Not specifically, no.
You don't know them. They have a widely, highly regarded reputation.
I have no
Objection
reason
as answered.
to dispute that.
Okay. And in Deposition Exhibit 1, he had an MRI brain scan without contrast performed there.
Yes.
All right. And this, again, this is January 13th of 09.
Right.
This would have been within about 6 to 18 months after he had killed Cassandra Crawford, Kimya Rollison, and Mary Jo Newton, and about 2 months or so before he would kill Esme Kenny.
Yes.
So it's right in the time frame when these things were happening. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the finding on that MRI from January of 2009 was normal. Is that correct?
It was read as an unremarkable MRI.
Unremarkable MR examination of the brain without mass, hemorrhage, or acute infarct.
Yes.
So they found a normal brain scan. They did not find evidence of traumatic brain injury.
See, this type of brain MRI is very insensitive to the detection of traumatic brain injury. You can actually get a normal, unremarkable MRI of a cadaver's brain or someone who's in a coma. And so simply because the brain scan is read as unremarkable doesn't really mean that the person is even alive or is capable of becoming conscious, because it just means the shape and structure of the brain is normal. And so it's very insensitive at detecting brain injury, because many brain injuries occur at a microscopic level that affect function. That's why a functioning brain scan is much more sensitive and accurate at the detection of brain injury than a conventional MRI of the brain.
You never did ask to look at this brain scan or get records from this MRI that was done?
If it was unremarkable, I thought that it was not really going to make a significant difference, because it's well known that many people with brain injuries have normal brain MRI scans, and but that doesn't mean that the function of the brain is normal. And in fact, in Mr. Kirkland's case, it clearly was not normal. It was clearly consistent with.
Are you saying it was not normal in 2009? You never saw his brain scan in 2009, did you?
I'm saying that based on the PET scan that he had obtained, that there was clear evidence of old brain injuries. And if you look at his history, he clearly has multiple instances in which he could have sustained multiple brain injuries, beginning from the time he was a child and he was being physically abused by his father, and then when he was 17, when there was this accident at Queen City Barrow in 1985, and memory loss was noted, and then in 2004, when he had this bicycle accident with a right-sided facial fracture created at Mercy Franciscan Hospital, and after that particular incident, he was known to show a significant change in his personality by Roberta Baldwin, who said that prior to that accident in 2004, that he had been an active member of the church, he had a job, he was helping her out with her kids, he was helping her out with her bills. After that, he became homeless. His behavior resulted in him no longer being welcome in the church, that he was incapable of holding a job. So there was a clear behavioral change after this 2004 accident.
That's not what his mother attributed his change in behavior to, is it?
Objection argument of...
Didn't she attribute it to his hanging with older men who would drink and use drugs, and he started emulating their behavior? Isn't that what the mother, in her interview by the state public defender, attributed that change to? Not to some injury he suffered?
I have no reason to dispute the fact that that's what the mother states, but I believe that it's quite clear to me that his behavior changed significantly after this 2004 bicycle accident, and going from having a home and to becoming homeless and living out of a van, having a job and being welcome at church and no longer being welcome at a church. I'm sorry. I mean, clearly, there was a very significant behavioral change that occurred after this 2004 bicycle accident.
Well, how do you pick and choose what you believe and don't believe? You believe what this Baldwin woman said, but not what the mother said or the brother said.
I'm not disbelieving that the mother believes that that's what happened, but the mother is not a physician.
Neither is the Baldwin woman.
No, but
correct?
the Baldwin woman is...
Objection argument of...
she is observing firsthand his behavior, and so she has a firsthand view of what his behavior is like.
As is the mother.
Not as close as Roberta. Roberta has a closer view, in my opinion, than the mother would have had at that age, and she clearly saw a significant change after this bicycle accident.
Okay. Then there was another, you had a report of this other scan that was done on him in January 26th of 07. That was after the car crash, is that correct?
Yes.
And again, it was done at University Hospital?
Yes.
And the findings are, by the doctor, I do not think he has a significant head injury. CAT's CT of the head did not show any hemorrhage or mass effect. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, it's the same issue, though, that a structural...
That's 2007. That's after the bike accident as well. Is that correct?
Objection. Let him answer the question.
It's the same issue. Structural brain imaging is very insensitive for the detection of brain injuries. And so that you can even have a normal CT of the brain with a cadaver. So just because the structure of the brain is normal doesn't mean that the function of the brain is normal. And that's why a PET scan is a much better test.
All right. Well, I'll come back to that. Let me identify deposition, State's Deposition Exhibit number 6. These are the medical records that relate to his Mercy Franciscan trip after the bike accident. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the history of the present illness that was given by the patient, 36-year-old who fell off his bike and injured his shoulder. He was not unconscious. The diagnosis is left shoulder dislocation. There's nothing in there about any fracture or any injury to the head or the face.
I'm going to object. I think it does indicate facial pain on that same line.
Patient is awake and alert. Some tenderness over the right zygoma.
The zygoma is part of the face.
It doesn't diagnose any fracture, which is what you're talking about, right? You relied on that, and there's no fracture.
I relied on that, but there are other statements that indicated in the hundreds of pages that there was a fracture.
Okay. And you indicate that these injuries showed a marked change in his personality in about 2004, and you base that on the Baldwin woman, his girlfriend. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Isn't it a fact that he was exhibiting extremely violent behavior well before 2004?
That's true.
His sister talks about him abusing her and her friends. Is that correct?
Objection.
That's true. He has episodes of violent behavior that his sister noted.
And then there's State's Deposition Exhibit 2. That's the pre-sentence investigation for a homicide he committed in May 1987 when he killed his uncle's girlfriend and set the house on fire to cover that up.
Objection.
Well before the bike accident or the car accident, correct?
Before you answer, we will object to this question. We believe that this improperly introduces evidence that is irrelevant. We believe that any probative value is significantly outweighed by inappropriate prejudicial effect. We believe that introduction of this type of evidence is violative of Mr. Kirkland's due process rights and rights to a fair trial. Thank you. You may proceed.
My response would be that's relevant based upon Dr. Wu's theory that an accident or an injury Kirkland suffered in 2004 caused the brain injury which led to his violent outburst. He was violent, as I said, based on this evidence well before that.
What I have also said, though, that he clearly had a history of being physically abused as a child with contusions to his head by his father from...
Which I haven't seen any documentation of.
And again,
Objection, argumentative.
that doesn't mean that, I wouldn't make these kind of things up. And I'm sure I can find the citation, but it's going to take a significant amount of time and page through hundreds of pages, and I don't want to use this time in the deposition for that purpose.
Doctor, you've had since November 6th of last year, have you not?
Well, I've had many other things going on in my life as well, many other cases I've been involved in.
All right, so in support of a post-conviction claim, in this case it was filed on Kirkland's behalf, and the Ohio Supreme Court ordering a new sentencing hearing for him, his attorneys then asked you to come on board and look at the brain scans of Anthony Kirkland. Is that correct?
Yes.
They went to Judge Dinkelhocker and asked him to appoint you in the case, and he did that. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And he also signed an order at the request you made through the attorneys to have Anthony Kirkland transported to a hospital for a brain scan. Is that correct?
I believe 3 different types of brain scans.
Correct. 2 types of MRIs
Yes.
and a PET scan.
Yes.
Because PET scan is what you feel is necessary to do this. Is that correct? To look for this injury?
I believe all 3 of these scans are helpful in the assessment of suspected brain injury.
And in fact, based upon that order signed by Judge Dinkelhocker, Kirkland was transported to the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center in Columbus on 2 different occasions. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you know the reputation of that medical facility?
I imagine it's very good. I mean, I don't know that area very well specifically.
You've never been there? You never?
No, I've never. I mean, I've been to Ohio to do the case Western, 30 years ago. But
you didn't go there for these PET scans?
No, I
the
didn't.
PET scan and these MRIs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You stayed here in California?
That's correct.
But you would have written out an order for them to be done. Is that correct?
Yes.
It's like, I guess, a prescription for medication. You write an order for a procedure to be done.
Yes.
You direct how you want it done.
Yes.
Do you remember what protocol you requested for these procedures?
I believe the PET scan was a rescue PET scan.
Okay. And there's another procedure you can do called an activation protocol. Is that correct?
Yes.
What's the difference in the 2?
Well, an activation PET scan utilizes a activation task during the uptake of the radioactive sugar molecule. And so the activation task that I have used in many cases is a vigilance task, and there is a...
I'm going to enter an objection at this point. We can agree that he ordered a at-rest test. The fact that there's also could have ordered activation protocol is irrelevant. We're comparing apples to apples.
Go ahead with your answer.
Vigilance task is a task that can be employed during the uptake of the radioactive sugar. And so this is one way of doing a PET scan. I think the other way is a resting PET scan where radioactive sugar molecule is administered when the subjects are at rest, not doing any particular task.
It wants to be in a dark, soothing environment while that test is administered, correct?
A dimly lit room, eyes open, yes.
Why in this case did you request the resting exam?
Well, I think that a resting scan is easier logistically to perform if the center doesn't have experience with activation scans. And then if the suspected pathology is significant, a resting scan is adequate or sufficient to detect a significant pathology. I would say that if the suspected pathology was very subtle, then I think an activation scan would be more sensitive and accurate at detecting small, subtle abnormalities, but judging from the history and the behavioral abnormalities that I received about Mr. Kirkland, I did not suspect that his abnormalities were going to be subtle or mild.
I did not suspect what?
His abnormalities would be subtle or mild. And so I did not feel it was necessary to use a more sensitive, more complicated test when it seemed that, judging from his history, the rescue scan would be logistically easier and would be more than capable of detecting pathology.
Did you ever contact the doctors at the university hospital and talk to them about the scans that you wanted done?
No, I don't recall doing that. My recollection is I wrote a prescription.
And do you know what protocol they used?
I believe they used the rescue protocol.
You believe that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you do these scans, there are certain things that you don't want them to do the morning of the scan. You don't want them to smoke. Is that true? You don't want them to take medication that might affect how this comes out?
I think that medication is, in general, I think not going to have a huge effect on a scan. And if you look at the procedure guidelines for PET scan, medications in general are considered to have a fairly minor effect on a scan, so I don't think that's a huge issue in terms of clinical testing. There are, unless there are certain medications that have certain effects, like antipsychotic medication can elevate striatal metabolism.
Was Kirkland on any of that type of medication at the time? You don't know, do you?
I would have to review my notes. I don't recall.
Is it fair to say you did not call the prison that was housing him and tell them on the day that you transport him to Ohio State, make sure he doesn't take any antipsychotic medication?
I didn't think
I'm
that...
going to object here that there's no evidence that he did take any medication or smoked or did anything other than what the doctor prescribed.
So will you please answer my question, Dr. Will?
Yeah,
did you make such a call?
I did not call the prison. I did not feel that it was necessary for me to do that.
You never have, since that was performed, complained about the scans that were done, have you? Have you ever complained about either one of them?
No.
As far as you were concerned, your order was followed?
As far as I can tell, yes.
And they were properly done? There's no reason to think that the tests were done improperly?
No.
Okay. In the order that you wrote, do you remember writing this sentence, please defer DTI interpretation?
Yes.
Why did you write that?
Well, I would say that in my experience, most facilities don't have the capability of doing quantitative DTI analysis, and so I felt that it would be easier just to get it off the table.
Easier?
Yes,
What does that phrase mean? Please defer DTI interpretation.
Could we identify the exhibit here?
I'm sorry, this is in State's Deposition Exhibit 3, and I can give you, it's on a numbered page, page 10. It's in the orders from Dr. Will.
Just a moment, please. Is what you're referring to here?
It's right there. Yeah. Okay. What does that mean? What are you asking them not to do?
well, I'm asking them not to interpret the DTI scan.
Because you didn't want their opinion in that report?
I felt that my experience in general has been that most radiologists have very limited experience with DTI.
Isn't it true that what you knew was that you were going to find traumatic brain injury and an abnormal scan, and that they likely would find a normal scan?
I mean, I suspected there would be a high probability that he would show abnormalities given his history, and the average radiologist has very little experience with DTI, TBI, and I didn't want someone who was inexperienced reading a scan.
The average radiologist?
Yes.
That's what these guys do every single day.
Objection argumentative.
What makes you think they're in any way average?
Well, in my experience, most radiologists, especially at that time, had very little experience with DTI compared to the experience I've had.
you're not a radiologist, and you're not a neuroradiologist. You're a psychiatrist, is that correct?
That's correct. But I have extensive experience with PET, DTI, and quantitative volumetrics.
All right, but you didn't want them rendering an opinion that might be contrary to yours.
I didn't want people who would likely have much less experience reading the scan than the DTI portion.
So in any event, pursuant to the orders that Judge Dinkelacker signed, is it your understanding that Anthony Kirkland was transferred to the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center on October 6th?
Yes.
And the PET scan was administered?
Yes.
All right. Again, you don't have any complaints about that scan or the way it was done or who performed it or anything like that? It was done by an Ohio State University radiologist named Chadwick Wright. You know Dr. Wright?
No, I do not know Mr. Wright.
You don't have any reason to believe he's not an outstanding radiologist, do you?
I have no reason to believe that he's not an outstanding radiologist, but I have reason to believe that he probably has little experience with looking at PET scans for patients with suspected brain injuries.
Well, that's because that's not even an approved protocol for minor head injuries.
Objection, it assumes we're talking about minor injuries.
I would say that, most radiologists have little experience with looking at PET scans for traumatic brain injury. Most of them use PET scans predominantly for cancer studies, and if they see a brain that doesn't have cancer, that
they're approved for that purpose, are they not?
It is approved for that purpose.
And
yes.
it's approved for identifying, diagnosing dementia?
Yes.
It's not approved, in this case, for finding traumatic brain injury. Is that correct?
Well, I would say that there are clinical textbooks that document the fact that PET scans can be used for the assessment of traumatic brain injury. They may not be covered by insurances, but that doesn't mean that they can't be used clinically in that way.
We'll come back to that. Do you recall the findings that Dr. Wright made after he performed this PET scan?
I believe that his scan finding was that the scan was unremarkable.
It clearly differs from your opinion, is that correct?
Yes.
There is no suspicious focus, and I'm on page 4 of State's Deposition Exhibit 3. There is no suspicious focus.
An objection. We need to go off the record for a minute. This was your... we're off the record.
We are off the record. The time is 1:55 p.m. We are back on the record. The time is 2 p.m.
Doctor, what I was asking you before when we went off the record, Dr. Wright made some findings. There is no suspicious focus of abnormally increased or decreased FDG uptake identified within the cerebral or cerebellar hemispheres. On the non-contrast enhanced CT images, there are non-specific calcifications noted within the basal ganglia impression. There is no PET evidence of abnormal FDG uptake within the brain. That's his findings?
Yes.
And he's essentially saying, this is a normal brain scan. I do not find evidence of any traumatic brain injury.
Yes.
And that certainly disagrees with you, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Kirkland was returned to the prison and then brought back to Ohio State University's Wexner Medical Center on October the 11th, and a doctor performed the MRI brain scans.
Right, Dr. Bolter, I believe?
Dr. Daniel Bolter, that's correct. Do you know Dr. Bolter?
I do not know him.
Ever heard of him? He's
I
a
have
neuroradiologist.
Never heard of him previously.
Any reason to believe he's not an outstanding neuroradiologist?
No reason.
All right. All right, he did those scans and they were sent on to you. And again, you never complained about those scans. You never said, we need to redo those, you didn't do what I asked, or anything like that?
No, I had no complaints with the scan.
And these two scans from Dr. Wright and now from Dr. Bolter are scans you received and you relied on in your comparisons with your database of normal resting brain scans.
Yes.
Okay. When Dr. Bolter did the MRI, did he agree with the opinion you would later render in this case?
I believe that he viewed this as an unremarkable MRI, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, he did. He found it to be normal, in a word, what all these highlighted things, no parenchymal signal abnormally is identified, no evidence of edema or mass lesion, no evidence of hemorrhage, no diffusion, restriction, or other evidence of acute infarct is identified. He says that it's normal brain scan, no evidence of traumatic brain injury. Is that correct?
That's what he stated based on the kind of exam that he focused on, which are predominantly the less sensitive method of assessing for brain injuries on an MRI scan. He clearly did not utilize a quantitative approach towards the assessment of DTI, and he clearly did not use a quantitative approach towards the assessment of volumetrics, which are much more sensitive and accurate at detecting brain injuries.
Is that why you asked that he defer DTI interpretation? Because that's exactly what you didn't want to see in a report?
I requested that because I requested that because
I'm going to object at this point. Dr. Bolter does say exactly why. Says, please note, however, that the quantitative voxel-wise analysis was not performed.
And why?
As this is not routinely available outside of research settings.
Correct.
And so he didn't do the same kind of exam that Dr. Wu did.
Well, thank you. Doctor, the fact of the matter is you had already decided you were going to find evidence of traumatic brain injury, correct? Based upon the interviews you heard.
I suspected that there was a high probability that his scans would show such findings, but I was not going to prejudge it until I actually saw the evidence.
You weren't going to prejudge it?
Yeah, well,
You're 100%. You're 100% at finding traumatic brain injury in these types of scans.
Objection argumentative.
Is that about right?
I would say that there have been cases where I did not find abnormalities, so that
Name one.
Well, as I stated, these were older cases that I do not recall the names of.
Isn't the fact is you're being paid to find traumatic brain injury, Dr. Bolter's being paid simply to do a test. He doesn't have a dog in the fight.
I believe that Dr. Bolter is not using the most sensitive and accurate means of assessing a scan that he's, and when you use a less sensitive and not up-to-date method of assessing the brain, you're going to miss significant abnormalities.
The doctors sent along to you the scans that they did, is that correct?
Yes.
You had written orders for?
Yes.
And once you received those, you used those and compared those to the normal brain scans in your normal database, is that correct?
Yes.
And it's based upon that comparison that you wrote your report, is that correct?
Yes.
That's not all they sent along to you. They also sent along a copy of the reports that they made with their findings, isn't that true?
Yes.
All right. When you finished your report, you sent along to Kirkland's then attorneys, you sent along to them your report and the scans, correct?
Yes.
But you didn't send along the report that you got from Doctors Wright and Bolter, did you?
I don't recall specifically.
You don't remember that from your last deposition?
I have no reason to dispute it. It's just
Well, the only way we got those reports from the Ohio State Medical Center was to contact Kirkland's then attorneys who contacted you, correct? Do you have a recollection of that?
Objection.
I mean, I would imagine that...
This is Dr. Wu's deposition. He should be testifying, not the prosecutor.
This is cross-examination, Tim.
I agree.
Okay? All right. Do you understand my question?
Can you restate your question, please?
Why did you not send along to Kirkland's then attorneys the reports from the doctor, Dr. Wright and Dr. Bolter, when you sent back your report sent them your report and the scans that those doctors did. Why did you not send along their reports with their findings?
I had assumed that they would have obtained those reports directly from the center, and that they were interested primarily in my reports.
And that they were what?
They were interested primarily in my reports, not the reports that I had assumed they could have received from the center directly.
Okay. You wrote the order, though, correct?
Yes.
So the stuff would come to you.
But people ask for copies of records, especially if they're the guardians, representative of a patient from a medical center all the time, and can get it directly from the medical center. I assume that the attorneys would be the guardians and could have requested a copy of those reports directly from the medical center. They wouldn't need me to obtain it and send it to them.
Well, you were contacted by Mr. Alvin, correct? And you ultimately did send him those reports?
Yes.
Okay. You weren't hiding them from us, is that what you're saying?
No, I mean, I just assumed that he had it already. I didn't think it was necessary to resend it, but he was saying that he did have it, so I said, okay, fine, I'll send it.
Okay, so now you remember that?
Based on our discussion now, yes.
This is Deposition Exhibit 4. This is a letter Mr. Alvin wrote to me explaining that he contacted you and you sent the reports along to him. That's how we got them, right?
I mean, I don't know exactly how you received them. I mean, I know what I did, but I'm not sure.
You sent them to Mr. Alvin when he called you and asked for them?
Yes.
Okay. Were you hiding those from us?
No.
Do you remember testifying at the November deposition? And do you remember being asked those questions and saying, you do understand discovery, that we're entitled to see things, and that what you give to those lawyers is going to come to us?
Yeah, I assume that that's going to be true.
Do you remember what your explanation for why we didn't get those reports before Mr. Alvin called you was?
I don't recall exactly what I stated.
That they just got lost in the shuffle?
That may have very well been. I mean, there were a lot of records.
All right. Do you know Dr. Alan Waxman?
I mean, I know him, yes. I've chatted with him on a number of occasions.
He heads the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center's Radiology and Nuclear Imaging Center?
Yes.
Okay. Any question about his qualifications and his expertise in this field?
Well, he's certainly a certified nuclear medicine specialist and
Certified what?
nuclear medicine specialist. I've butted heads with him on many occasions.
Do you know what your reputation is in the medical legal field involving brain scan examination?
Well, I suppose it depends on who you ask, you know. I know I've been asked to give keynote addresses to, for example, the American Association of Justice, and it's, you know, considered a prestigious kind of forum. And I've been asked to give lectures to the American Conferences Institute on brain injury, and that's more of a defense-oriented forum. And so, you know, I've been asked to give lots of talks by different people.
Would you agree that a considerable portion of the people in your field consider you a charlatan who will say or do anything for a few bucks?
I would be very disinclined to believe that to be true. I haven't seen any objective information or evidence that would back up that claim. That may be the unsubstantiated opinion of an opposing expert, but there's no objective data that backs up that claim.
Well, do you agree that a large part of the people in your field consider that you use these brain scans for a purpose that the governing bodies don't think is an appropriate use?
Objection. Students back on evidence.
I disagree with that. I mean, I haven't seen any objective evidence, any surveys, any numerical data that would back up that kind of allegation.
What groups of AMA recognized status have approved PET scans for the clinical purpose of establishing a diagnosis of brain injury from minor head trauma?
Well, I would say that...
Name me the groups.
That there are textbooks that have, for example, functional cerebral PET and SPECT imaging, which is a highly regarded textbook now in its 4th edition, which have a whole chapter on the use of PET scans in the assessment of brain injuries, including minor brain injuries. And this is a textbook that is used at many nuclear medicine or residencies. It's sold widely, and this is an authoritative text.
What is the American Academy of Neurology's position on PET or SPECT scans in the evaluation of minor head trauma at a time remote from the injury? What is their position on that?
Objection. Answer if you know.
I know that they had a position paper that's about 30 years old that they said at that time, 30 years ago, that they didn't feel there was sufficient evidence.
Have they changed that position?
I don't think they've changed this 30-year-old paper, despite the fact that there are a significant number of peer-reviewed publications that have come out, but societies don't always update their position papers to reflect the state of the art.
What about the American College of Radiology? What's their position on the use of these types of scans for minor or mild acute closed head injury?
Well,
Objection. Answer if you know.
I know that it depends on, I've seen some guidelines by the American College of Radiology in which they stated that they felt it was a 4 out of 9 at some point in time.
Not the document I'm looking at. It's a number 1, which is usually not appropriate.
Well, I would agree that it's not something that you would do for the average brain injury case, but I would say that in a case where it's a matter of life or death, and you're trying to get the most sensitive and accurate method of assessing a brain injury, I would say under those circumstances, in my opinion, would be appropriate, but I would agree that if someone came in and had a concussion from a motor vehicle accident, that it's not something that I would agree. It's not appropriate for that kind of case.
Dr. Wu, would you agree with me that the manner in which you examine and compare brain scans assures a finding of traumatic brain injury? It makes it inevitable.
No, I do not agree with that.
But you're 100%.
Based on the kind of patients I refer to me, the kind of patients that refer to me are patients like Mr. Kirkland, patients with significant behavioral pathology, significant history of multiple neurological instances, including being physically abused from the ages as a young child for multiple occasions, and having an accident when he was 17 where he had memory loss, and then having a bicycle accident in 2004 where he had a significant personality change. When you have this kind of patient who's referred to you, it's not surprising that these kind of scans will show abnormalities. They're not the average person.
We're still talking about the bike crash, and the bike crash had nothing to do with
Objection.
You're not letting me
Finish
finish
your
my
answer.
answer. You're interrupting me. How can I answer when you're interrupting? I lost my train of thought now. I'm sorry. Let's see. Yes, now I recall. So I was saying that when you have the kind of patient where you have someone who's been physically abused multiple occasions by the father from the time they were a young child to an early teenager, when they have a industrial accident where there's a memory loss, when they have a bicycle accident where there's a personality change, these kinds of instances are significant neurological events. It's not, and these are the kind of patients that are referred to me for brain scan. It's not surprising that these kind of patients have significant abnormalities. These are not normal people picked at random from the street.
Doctor, if an attorney has a client that's charged with a capital offense, can he contact you to assist in preparing mitigation, be assured that you'll find his client has traumatic brain injury?
I can't guarantee it. All I can say is that I will look, and if the evidence is there, I'm happy to document what I find, but
Up to this point, it's been 100%, hasn't it?
no, you're misstating one of the evidence. I stated that there have been a couple of occasions where there was no abnormalities, so when you state 100%, you're...
A couple in how many? 100?
Yes.
125?
But that's not 100%. You're misstating the evidence, and you're mischaracterizing my prior testimony.
You've made a lot of money doing this, have you not?
Well,
How much have you been paying? Well, go ahead and finish up before I ask the next one.
I mean, I have been paid for my services.
How much were you paid in this case?
Well, I would say in the 2017 case, I was paid about $9,990.
So about 10 grand?
Yes.
Okay. And you didn't do the scans?
That's correct.
You just got some discs of scans. I don't know, so is that the format they came to you on discs?
Yes.
And you looked at those and compared them with things you already had? And you put out a report that pretty much was boilerplate, that had already been written and used in other cases?
Okay.
Is that true or not?
Well, I would say that the methodology is the same, but the findings differ from each patient. So if I use the same methodology, the methodology is going to be the same when the methodology is the same. So, but the findings differ, so they are depending on the patient.
All right. Doctor, if you start finding normal brain scans, you're going to be killing the goose that's laying the golden egg for you. Is that a fair statement?
Objection.
True?
I think that's argumentative. I think that that's, I am ethical and I call it as I see it. And if there's no finding there, I'm happy to call it.
Twice.
And so I adhere to a code of ethics, and I believe in telling the truth. And so it's true that the vast majority of the cases have the kind of history with significant neurological psychiatric problems, and that these methods are very sensitive. And so it's not surprising that a very large percentage of them show abnormalities, but I can't guarantee that. And I can't guarantee a finding. All I do is I report what I see.
Doctor, why are we doing this deposition today here in Newport Beach as opposed to University of Cal Irvine?
I retired from the University of California, Irvine in March of last year after 30 years of service.
You retired?
Yes.
They didn't fire you?
No.
You sure about that?
Yes.
I'm finished. I don't have any further questions of Dr. Wu.
May I have Exhibit 3, please?
Sure.
Thank you. Dr. Wu.
Thank you, Mr. Cryer, I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, that was an hour, okay, and I'm trying to break this up for you a little bit. We can do it one of two ways. You want to stand up, I'm going to ask you to do that at least. Stand up, stretch a little bit, or if anybody need to go back real quick. Okay, that's fine. I'm looking for a head shaking, that's fine. I will take a very short break, take as much time as you need. Remember the admonitions, don't talk about it, don't read about it, don't think about it. We'll see you back in a little bit.